An app that lets you see a picture of yourself as an older person has been at the center of a new scare over data and privacy. Tech companies, they do know as much about us now as the secret police of old would have done. So is it time we took steps to protect our data? You're watching Roundtable. And a warm welcome from me, David Foster. From our social media photos to our spending habits to our route to work, data about us pretty much everywhere. And it helps to make services, yes, more convenient, but it has huge implications for privacy and surveillance. We'll be discussing why we need to take it more seriously.
FaceApp 10 Years Challenge and other social media trends. Every second, we create new data. We perform 40,000 search queries on Google alone every second. Facebook users send more than 31 million messages and view nearly 3 million videos every minute. And with the growth in video and photo data, up to 300 hours of video are uploaded every minute to YouTube, for instance. More and more of our lives are recorded as digital data, then systematically stored, analysed and sold. Big data may improve our lives by connecting us, but it also allows companies to track us, and that poses a risk not only to our privacy, but to our free will. And now surveillance expands to our homes, cars and daily activities by harvesting data from smart and mobile devices. So what can we do to keep our data safe?
Very pleased to say that with me at the round table we have James Castro Edwards, who's a data protection and cybersecurity lawyer. We have Ian Kennedy Compson, Chief Exec of the cybersecurity company Enterprise Red, and Adi Kohler, editor of the Journal of Data Protection and Privacy, although it took us 3 weeks to get that out of him because of data protection and privacy. Listen, a very warm welcome to you all. When it comes down to this, when it's all boiled down, I don't care who knows that I had an egg sandwich for breakfast. I'm not going to get bombarded by egg emails. Why on earth does it matter?
It matters because we are living in a society, we're living in a culture where we can't have any secrets. I mean, even that egg sandwich that you had for breakfast, it's a bit strange you had an egg sandwich for breakfast, but if you did, somewhere, someone probably knew about it.
Yeah, but my point is, what does it matter?
Well, I think the egg sandwich thing is quite funny, but it may be that you may have dropped off your child at a nursery and actually probably didn't want to let that information out to people that you didn't know, for example. You know, there may be a dispute that you may be having with your partner or something where other people may have access to that information. So the idea of privacy now has to be almost rewritten in a way that your introduction alluded to.
Are we looking at an electronic age of the neighbours twitching their lace curtains in suburbia and looking out to see what you were doing? It's just happening all the time.
I think that's a potential scenario because social media platforms, Facebook being the primary one, it's in the news a lot, invite you and you very, very clearly just volunteer your data to them without any thought particularly. And what they do is mine that data and they sell it and then they give you context-based advertising. So that is an example of where the market is going.
But then again, I come back to the point of why should I care? Because they give me content-based advertising. I'm walking down the street away from the office, and the sign that greets me, because it knows it's me, is something that advertises something I like. I like golf. It would advertise golf clubs. Is that a problem?
That in itself isn't, because if it's reducing the clutter of non-relevant advertising, that's fine to a point. Where it becomes obtrusive is a problem if it's too much. But there's another element to this, which is where Cambridge Analytica got burned, was the sinister element of getting data mining and the way they mistreated the data.
Then explain to us, because that story's been around for so long, and it's all part of the massive fine that Facebook have just had to, well, I don't know whether they've paid it, but it's been levied against them. Just remind everybody out there why that was such a big deal, because it seemed to sort of bring it all out into the open.
Well, initially, it was to look at, they put a quiz out there, and it was to about 300,000 people. But what they neglected to to filter was the friends of the people on the quiz. So it went out to a significantly higher number of people than was just initially on the quiz.
And you were taking part in this quiz thinking it was all good fun.
And yes, and what happened was the argument goes that it actually steered or influenced the election results.
In the United
2016,
States.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. You've got to be dumb to fall for that one, really, haven't you? Or is it just something that we don't really know about yet? We're not aware of the pitfalls.
I think that's correct. It's so complicated, the processes that go on behind the scenes. You wouldn't have necessarily thought that your interests, what you eat, who you associate with, inferences can be made from that. So, for instance, you might be susceptible to vote in a particular way based on your profile, and you won't know that as an individual what's going on behind the scenes. So, I think it's a common misperception that people say, "Well, I'm not bothered about data protection because I have nothing to hide," but in fact, what's taking place behind the scenes by big tech operators is so complicated that you don't really have an easy way of understanding, or most people won't know what's going on, and they can't object to it, they can't exercise choice, and they can't exercise control.
In a way, that's how the internet works, right? I mean, the internet is about what we call surveillance capitalism. In other words, people are watching what we're doing, monitoring our behavior, gathering up that data about our behavior, and then flogging it to an advertiser. So actually what they're doing is they're surveying us, and they're doing that for money. Now, the thing is, they're not being transparent, they're not being accountable, and I would argue we don't have as much control over our personal data as we should do.
Okay, we'll come back to the matter of whether we choose to do this or not in just a moment, because we're giving away something. We're not having to pay for it. We're giving it away, and they're perhaps making use of it. But you and our viewers are going to find out a little bit more about me today. Not only do I like egg sandwiches sometimes for breakfast, I play a bit of golf, but I'm also into home baking. Bread, boring, boring, boring. But isn't it fantastic for me when I go onto a site that it comes up with a new advert for a different bread tin or some new flour or something like that? It's a wonderful world.
Yeah, that's if you've decided to share that information with other people, David. I mean, the point you're making here is that's great and that adds value for you. But let's say that actually you hadn't done that you hadn't consciously decided to share that information. You're being bombarded.
It was only because I clicked on something that it comes back to me.
Yeah.
So if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't. But I chose to do that.
Yeah, but on the internet, you need to be told whether they're going to be planting a cookie on your computer, for example, as you're surfing for new recipes for bread, for example. I mean,
If they put a cookie in my bread, it would go horribly wrong.
We're going to talk about cookies and bread. We're going to get completely lost here. But the point I'm making is you need to know from a transparent point of view what is happening to your personal data, and you have some control
But
over
we're just lazy. We don't bother to find out. There's that thing that says General Data Protection Regulations has been around for a year now. We don't bother to read it.
But
You say find out about it, but
No,
we
but-
don't go through it every time. We just click accept.
It's a pop-up. You get a pop-up. You'll be told. It's kind of what they call just-in-time. Nothing to do with baking. Just-in-time notice.
Or of the automotive industry. Yeah. But the fact is, it's there. And I come back to the whole thing. Is why do we care? And I think we've gone through that to some extent. But the second thing is, we could find out if we wanted to. Could we prevent it?
Yes, and it's about training and education on a personal level. It is about the propensity for people to not just sign up to terms and conditions just because it's a pop-up. There was a program a few years ago which were talking about the changing terms and conditions which all of the main FANG stocks had done, and they're a huge number of pages of terms and conditions. Nobody reads those. If you sign up to a Facebook account, you're not going to read 10, 12, 20 pages of T's and C's. So the problem there is that everybody's into the short-term win. It's an instant gratification society we're in. They won't read them. And this is part of the problem, because going down the line, if you put something inappropriate on a Facebook or other social media platform, and it's inappropriate about your spouse or your work colleagues, or when you've been doing something when you're drunk or whatever could be, it's like a ticking time bomb. So the transparency is not there. And people just default to the common unintelligent view.
But
But damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you happen to be the social media company and you put out 3 lines that people can readily understand, then you could be accused of not being transparent enough, not putting everything out there. But if you put out 20 pages of legalese, you're down because you put out something that's incomprehensible. What do you do?
Well, you can't do that now. I mean, the whole point about the GDPR was to kind of make things a bit easier for people to be able to engage with organisations that want to flog them products and services or information society services, as it describes. So it's got to be age appropriate and ordinary language. It's got to be easy to understand. It can't be buried in,
But there's still
in
loads
terms
of
and
it.
conditions, as James will probably know
But
more
there's
than I
still
do.
loads of it, isn't there? How can you avoid that without oversimplifying?
It's very difficult. It's treading a balance between providing the information that people need to see to understand what's going to be done with their personal data, but not making it so complicated that you need to be a lawyer to read that website privacy notice. And the reality is, if you visit, for instance, 10 or 20 websites a day, you're simply not going to read 10 or 20.
You ever read any
10
one of
pages.
them? I suppose you would. You're a lawyer.
From time to time, yes, but it's not something that I do as a matter of course if I was going to a website. And also, they're designed not to be transparent. For instance, the famous wooden lie would be, tick the box if you agree to us sharing your personal data with carefully selected third parties. In practice, what that means is that we'll share it with anyone that will give us the money. And that's not that was not the intention. So the GDPR became law last year, and what that requires is concise, specific consent. So you need to be told exactly what's going on with your personal information,
Okay.
and you need to agree to it.
What we have at the moment is a public, if we can generalise like that, that is either not prepared or not able, or doesn't have the time, or for whatever reason, to read all the rules and regulations. Therefore, something is happening to its information that perhaps it doesn't like. Now, it seems like it's have your cake and eat it in that, because you want to be able to use the equipment, if you like, the social media platforms, but at the same time, you want to. So, what happens now to make this better for the public and for companies and so on? How can that be done? Ardy, we'll come back.
I think there needs to be well, in fact, the GDPR promotes this, which is privacy by design and privacy by default. So these concepts need to be baked into new systems or new websites. And the idea being that the tech operators are sophisticated and complex, and the average person will not necessarily understand what's going on. So you can't try to fool them by putting in place complicated terms and conditions and things that they have no choice but to agree to. It should be the default setting is the most privacy friendly. In other words, you take the least personal data from that individual and you don't use it.
And
for
then you would
things-
have to ask for more if you wanted it.
Exactly, yes. That's the fair way of doing it, because otherwise the bargaining position between the individual and the tech company is such that the individual doesn't really have a choice. They don't really know what's going on. They're out of their depth, and they find themselves pushed into a position.
But you are not going to end up in a position which would seem to be probably the fairest, where if the data company or the social media company wanted my data, it would have to buy it from me, are you? You're not going to end up in that position.
Well, no, that might happen. That might happen because...
Well, they're not going to, are they?
Well, no.
Okay, tell me.
Bear with me. Bear with me.
Fascinating, yeah.
The GDPR, not to get too technical, is based on a model which has, if you like, a triangle. At the top of the triangle is what's known as the data subject, you and me. At the bottom of that is the data controller, the business, for example, and a company which the business might use to process your data, called the data processor. And so with that triangle, it's an old-fashioned way of thinking about things. You give your personal data to someone, you say, please don't hurt me with the way in which you process it or use other people to do that, et cetera, et cetera. Now, clearly, it's in the interest of businesses actually to make sure that there is some transparency and accountability in terms of what they're doing with your personal data. And actually, the shift now is towards consumers and customers and clients being their own data controllers. In other words, just not handing over something, they're kind of keeping that. Let's say, like in a digital wallet, for example. So what organizations and brands are now thinking of doing is creating what they call a PET, a privacy-enhanced technology, where you put your personal data into that, and then you decide who you're going to give that to. Now, the point about payment is quite interesting.
Which egg sandwich, dropping kids off at school, that wouldn't apply in this case, would it? Because they're way outside your wallet.
Well, no. I mean, you, as the data controller, make those decisions as to who should have access to your personal data rather than just handing it all over to one entity. And for some brands who want to have your business, they may well have to pay you to have access to your personal
Pets,
data.
once again, personal.
They are privacy-enhanced technologies.
Privacy
Pets. We're going to have a special edition
Is
next year
he
on
making sense with this?
it's a great idea in theory, but how is that ever going to work in practice? I just cannot see how that will happen. I cannot see how the average person is going to have the time or the inclination to control their data and say who they will and won't share it with.
Well, they do that already. They have a dashboard or something on a website where they can find out for themselves what information you have on them, who's been shared, who's had that information, who you're sharing it with, what the purposes are. Also, for the length of time you're going to keep that person's personal data.
And you've been involved in this at the sharp end for what, 6 years now since your company started?
Quite a while, yes.
2013. We have a lawyer, we have a journalist here. As somebody who's actually sort of encountering this day by day, how are we going to change it to make the businesses that use it or use our data feel that they're getting something out of it, and those at the sharp end, top of the pyramid, as Ardi says, us, feel like we're not being exploited?
So there's two elements. The people element, which is part of the whole core of it all. So the concept of a human firewall in a business is interesting, because that is around training and educating people on what to share and what not to share. The main thing we get involved in is, within the context of an employee within a company, is how a company is going to be able to stop data breaches, regular penetration tests, all of the hygiene factor stuff that you need to have has to be put in place. And cybersecurity is a very complex area. It's a multi-layered approach typically. There's no one single product or service that will do it.
Will I ever be able to say, okay, I'm going to use something that is out there, something that you or perhaps another company supplies, that will make it impossible for a social media platform to find out all of the things about me that I would rather keep to myself?
Social media is another nuance of all of this. The problem is the governance of how social media is handled at a corporate level. So you have very, very careful adjudication with the responsible corporations to make sure what you put out there is relevant, and how you set your privacy settings up, et cetera, are relevant. On a personal level, there's this massive dichotomy at the moment where people will share everything, and that's happened with employees of companies that have been inappropriate on their own social media platform that's on a personal level. So it's down to the rigor of individuals and how they deal with it.
And is that possible at the moment? Because we sort of approach this as though we're being stripped naked, for want of a better phrase, and every aspect of our personality and our bodies is being examined by somebody who we don't want to see that closely at ourselves. Could we prevent that now by just taking an extra few steps?
It would help us, and again, back to the concept of training and education. The problem we're going to see coming down the line is Internet of Things, which is a new massive fillip in the way in which data will be shared, because it's...
well, help us all understand that.
Internet of Things is other toaster, fridge, door lock, window, control, heater, anything you can think of, your car, is going to be connected to the internet. It's already beginning to happen. The issue of, one, the potential for that being breached is more, because you can have a printer sitting or a toaster in your Wi-Fi network, which is not properly configured. So you're open to an attacker coming into your network and getting everything within your network. If you
Equally, your toast could end up in the dishwasher and your heating could come on and start your car.
Yes,
Do
indeed.
you know how banks are broken into?
Banks?
Yeah, banks. They're broken into because people hack through the air conditioning system unit and get in that way, actually. They don't breach the bank's own information security.
It goes back to exactly what
technical thing.
Ian's saying. It's the Internet
These
of Things.
vulnerabilities are
It
everywhere.
opens the door.
It does.
Yeah.
The
And that
vulnerabilities
door's getting
everywhere.
bigger.
Yeah, and we're talking about autonomous vehicles. Every day, I'm sure on this channel, we have another story about a driverless vehicle. But those driverless vehicles are covered in cameras. Those driverless vehicles need to know what you're going to be doing.
I saw a driverless vehicle outside.
Did you?
Yeah, it
Did
was
you try to
parked.
hail it?
Sorry. Just at the side of the road.
Driverless vehicles, the technology is there, and this is the problem. People in technology run away with themselves because it's the art of the possible. But hang on a minute, are there any data protection and privacy and security issues involved? And as James has been saying, data protection by design and by default is now a legal requirement. So before we go off and produce new products and services, they must comply with data protection by design and by
I
default.
suppose what I'm driving at is, are we just being lazy? Are there ways of protecting ourselves now and preventing this sort of thing from happening, or do we need to look elsewhere?
I think, as Ian said, there's an element of personal responsibility. So people should stop oversharing. So you don't need to put everything on onto social media sites. You don't need to share all the personal data that you have about you. And remember that in the future, you might wish you hadn't shared that. So being a bit more discreet is something. When we advise companies, the vast majority of the companies that we advise on how to comply, they want to comply. They don't want to fall foul of the law. They want to respect people's personal data. Sometimes people come up with a great idea that involves using personal data in a way that perhaps the affected individuals wouldn't like so much.
There's no way of getting it back, though, once it's out there, is there? Because not only has it gone to the company to which you originally gave it, it has then gone from them, rather like 1,000 seeds from a wheat field, in all different directions. And from there, in other different directions. You couldn't ever get it back if you wanted to.
Exactly. It's very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. And for that reason, if it's certain types of sensitive information, the sorts of things that you wouldn't want known about you, for example, a medical condition or a particular philosophical or religious preference that you might not want people to know about, or your sexual preference, things like that, you can't put that genie back in the bottle if that's out there. So there's two parts that companies need to bear in mind. And one is keeping personal data safe, and the other is making sure that you actually give information back. So you tell people exactly what you're going to do with their personal data. You're not going to do things that they wouldn't expect.
2006, you started doing this.
Yes.
2013, you started your company. How much has changed in the intervening, let's say, decade and a bit, and the intervening 6 or 7 years? Go on, James, you first. Since
Dramatically. When I first started practicing in data protection, the maximum fine was £5,000. People weren't aware of the Data Protection Act. It was pretty special interest. It was just not something that people were particularly concerned about. The old Data Protection Act, 1998, descended from the Data Protection Regulation, which, the Data Protection Directive, which relates to a comment you made at the beginning of the session, which is how government states knew more about individuals than the tech companies now. The old law was there to protect individuals from an oppressive state. The new law, fast forward from 2006 to 2018, when the GDPR took effect, is to protect people from the surveillance marketing, if you like. So where lots of personal data is collected about people to sell them certain things, even when they don't know it's going on. So, for example, trying to influence them to vote in a particular way, or to donate more to a cause than they would have done because behind the scenes the charity knows that they're a potentially wealthy donor.
I'm going to come to you in a minute, Ardy. Ardy, do hang on to that thought, because we're coming towards the end of the programme, and I want to get Ian's thought on this first of all. In the last 5 years, you talk about £5,000 fine. I think the one against Facebook for Cambridge Analytica is in the billions, isn't it? No?
Well, I think...
Just a quick thought. I think it is.
Yes.
How much has changed from your perspective?
So from a technology perspective and a platform perspective, it's fundamentally changed. 5-6 years ago, Facebook was in the ascendancy. It was established. It had just gone IPO, I think, and it was one of
Which means it was told to the public.
It was showed to the public. It was one of the platforms. Since then, it's become absolutely dominant in the marketplace, and because of mobile devices, particularly making it very easy for people to sign up, there's been so much more take-up and immediacy of sign-up to things without the thought. So from a corporate perspective, the blurring of the internal-external network is gone. So there was a time when you had a VPN, you had an internal intranet, and you had all the information shared, and then the external stuff was done under governance, and if you were in the company, you would not be allowed to get outside of that firewall.
And it's exponential, Ardy, isn't it? Because if it was pretty bad 5 or 6 years ago and it's 10 times worse now, it's going to be 100 times worse, if you want to use the word worse, in a few years' time.
I think the bigger issue here, because we've been kind of skirting around, it's actually about data ethics. I think organisations are not evil. They actually are trying to do what they need to do in order to make products and services, employ people, create to GDP value, etc., etc. What they're trying to do is they're trying to deepen digital trust so they can do more with your personal data and mine, not less with it. But they have to do that in accordance with these higher standards of data protection, privacy and security. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. About being more accountable, about being more transparent, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. We're not trying to stifle innovation, which is another big argument which you hear about. Actually, is it a zero-sum game? Either have innovation or privacy. Can you not have both? Yes, you can have both. And that's the point, really. The point is, deepening digital trust. The trust is the big issue here. That's why we're in the studio talking to you about this today.
So I suppose what we're trying to suggest is, and we've got to wrap this up now, is that rather than filling every acre of your farmland with a crop that gives you so much in one go, what you've got to do is you've got to rotate your crops, you've got to maintain your customer loyalty, because one day they're going to say, actually, I don't like what you're doing, and the best thing you can do is keep them on side.
Ultimately, you have to understand from the other person's point of view, what is it that they want? What is their expectation? How do you build that trust with them so they keep coming back to finding out those recipes for bread and cookies?
But perhaps by that time, thank you very much indeed, by the way, perhaps by that time they've already emptied your wallet of not just your money, but also your personal data, everything they know about you. Thank you very much for taking part in the programme. It's always fascinating. And I hope you've enjoyed it too. Roundtable with me, David Foster, will be back very, very soon. We thank you for your company. Until next time, bye-bye.